වලා කුලින් වැස සමන් කුලක් වැඳ එළු බලා යනවා අනේ මගින් වැඩ ගනිව් ගනිව් හඬ හඬා ඔහේ යනවා
වලා කුලින් වැස සමන් කුලක් වැඳ එළු බලා යනවා අනේ මගෙන් වැඩ ගනිව් ගනිව් හඬ හඬා ඔහේ යනවා
දැවේ දැවේ බිම් දිදී රදස් දුම් බැලූ බැලූ හැමතේ යවව් යවව් මා එහි මෙහි ආගිමන් නිවා පොළොවේ
සමන් කුලක් වැඳ එළු බලා යනවා අනේ මගින් වැඩ ගනිව් ගනිව් හඬ හඬා ඔහේ යනවා
එදා රටේ මේ දනු තැතින් මා තැනින් තැනේ රඳවා මගින් වැඩක් ගෙන මටත් වැඩක් කොටලොවේ නමක් තැබුවා
වලා කුලින් වැස සමන් කුලක් වැඳ එළු බලා යනවා අනේ මගින් වැඩ ගනිව් ගනිව් හඬ හඬා ඔහේ යනවා
වැඩක් නොගත් දිය හඬා දොඩාමි උවේ බලා යනවා හැපි සිඳි සිඳු කෙරේ වැදි කරදියෙන් එළෝ යනවා
වලා කුලින් වැස සමන් කුලක් වැඳ එළු බලා යනවා අනේ මගින් වැඩ ගනිව් ගනිව් හඬ හඬා ඔහේ යනවා
Absolutely very. Well, I have great pleasure in inviting you, sir, to make a presentation.
Thank you.
This evening. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I would like to just to begin just to extend my appreciation and thanks to the National Trust for inviting me here, and I'd like to thank Lanka Santa and the Sunil Santha Society for being involved as well, to Nadika and to other people who have helped me, including a Filipino artist, Ambi Ambano, and a Malaysian artist, Ahmed Zaki Anwar. There have been many people actually involved in this particular lecture who have influenced and made contributions. When we talk about Sunil Santha, we're always talking about his music. And most of the lectures on Sunil Santha will invariably be about his songs and his music. But this lecture is a little bit different. I was here 2 years ago and I gave a lecture for the Sunil Santha Society, the man who invented Sunil music for a modern age. But this time I want to do something different because Sunil Santha was also a visual artist. And during the course of my research 2 years ago, I came across some photographs that Sunil Santha had taken. And I was intrigued by these photographs. And so I thought this would be something to explore, to see another side of Sunil Santha. So this lecture will be a little bit different because we're going to combine his photography work, his photographic work, which this we knew. As far as I know, these photographs have not been exhibited in public before. And so this will be quite exciting for me to do that. At the same time, I don't want to avoid the music, so there's going to be music as well. So the lecture revolves around these two parts, music and photography. And I'll try to draw some links between the two about his creativity and his approach to the visual and sound world. But in the beginning, I just want to talk a little about Sunil Santha himself. Who actually was Sunil Santha? This is an interesting question. If we talk about Sunil Santha, you know, and I know that's a strange question to ask a Sri Lankan audience, but there's a purpose to it. We know that Sunil Santha was a lyricist, he was a composer, a performer, a recording artist, a teacher, and a writer. We know Sunil Santha in these public roles. But what about the man himself? What distinguished his private, his public persona from his private man? And those who knew Sunil Santha have told me that he was stubborn, that he was uncompromising. I think we have to be careful with these sorts of words because these kinds of terms don't really say much about people. And I don't think it really gets to understanding him. I think a better way to understand him is perhaps through the stories shared by family and friends, the people who knew him very well. And this, I think, points to a better understanding about the man, about his life and his beliefs. But the first thing we should say about Sunil Santha is that he lost both parents at an early age. And his father died from a poisonous snake bite when he was 3 months old, and his mother died of fever some 3 years later. Sunil was raised by his grandmother and an uncle. And what impact the death of both parents had on his development from adolescence into adulthood is unknown, but it may explain certain personality traits that became firmly rooted in his beliefs. For example, it may explain why he began to create opportunities for a new generation of singers after he returned to Radio Ceylon in 1967. So many recording artists benefited from his return to Radio Ceylon. People from Nalini, Ranasinger, Amita Dalagama, and a whole host of others who he drew into his music world. And that was a beautiful thing that he did for a new generation of artists. The other thing that I noticed about Sunil Santha, and Nalini Ranasinger told me this a few years ago. She told me of all the recording artists and composers she worked with, Sunil Santha was the only one who would share his knowledge, who would share his expertise, and he would do it completely. He would never hold anything back. That's quite rare in a country like Sri Lanka and India, because anyone from a musician to an academia tends to hold things back because it's a way of protecting their position and status in society. But Sunil Santha didn't do that. I find that quite intriguing and quite admirable about the man. His interest in music began at an early age. He taught himself the harmonica, the guitar, the piano accordion. He sang in church choirs. But while he was attracted to music, and while he wasn't really keen on pursuing it as a career, his ambition was to study science. He wanted to become an inventor. However, in colonial Ceylon in the 1920s and 1930s, right up until SWRD Bandaranaike came to power in 1956, science was a subject for rich kids. And talented poor kids like Sunil Santha studied art subjects, and they became school teachers. So his career choices were really limited and constricted by a system operating in colonial Ceylon, which favoured English-speaking wealthy families. His interest in drama, painting and music was there before he entered teaching college, the teaching training college that he studied at in 1934. He had been involved in a dance drama called Dutagamu, and he had acted the part of the king. Music was another subject that he learned in the training school. But when he began teaching at the Mount Calvary School in Gaul in 1935, and this is a photo of the drama club that he was involved in. When he actually began teaching music there, it was an extracurricular subject. And this but he really shone as a teacher. His school music group won the Southern Regional School Music Competition over 3 consecutive years, from 1936 to 1938, while the number of students enrolling in the school increased due to his success as a teacher. But a big change came in his life in 1939 because Sunil decided to resign from his teaching post and decided he wanted to further his education in India. And with only 100 rupees in his pocket, given to him by his elder brother Rogus, he travelled to India to begin studying music at Rabindranath Tagore's School of Bengali Arts, Shantiniketan. And he attended the school for 1 year. He then moved to Lucknow to start a 4-year course studying vocal music, sitar performance, orchestration at Bakhandi College of Music. And for this he received a scholarship by the government of Ceylon. In India, he became good friends with people like Sarachanda at Shantiniketan in 1939 and 40, but he was never really close to Lionel Ederasinger, who once told Sunil Santha, quote, "You may shine here in India, but when you go back to Sri Lanka, you will have to work under me." I think in these words we see something that's very prominent in the music world, but it's not written about much in newspapers or write-ups, and that is professional jealousy is very much existent just about in every aspect of any human life. You put two people together, there's bound to be a certain amount of jealousy. But it certainly exists in music. And I think it's worth noting that although Sunil was promised the post of Inspector of Music in the Department of Education in Colombo, when he returned to Sri Lanka in December 1944, he found the job had already been given a few weeks earlier to Lionel Ederasinger. And as a consolation, he was offered a job as a physical education teacher, but fearing his knowledge of music would be wasted, he turned the job down and he began to forge an independent career as a composer, a singer, a recording artist at Radio Ceylon. And this was really a bold and risky move at the time because there's no guarantee of security and there's no guarantee of a regular income. But I think it says something about the man and about his convictions. He formed his own orchestra. He toured the country giving concerts and he became a household name. And he stood out from other composers and performers by deliberately avoiding Indian music influences. And this is how he went about forging a new kind of music with a strong singular sensibility. That's a very important word, sensibility, that a local person could identify with. Now, what about his personality? Let me share a few stories told to me by his family, which I think gives some insight into the man. One story takes place in World War II, when Sunil was living in India. He wanted to travel back to Sri Lanka, but he learned that the trains were only taking military personnel. So he thought to himself, how am I going to get back to Sri Lanka? His solution was ingenious in its simplicity, very much like his music. He went to a used clothing store, he bought a military uniform, he boarded a train, and he returned to Sri Lanka wearing a military uniform. I don't know if you can imagine Sunil Santha in a military uniform. It doesn't seem to be something I can imagine. He used to go to the cinema with his good friend here, Surya Sankar Molligoda. And they liked to watch the latest movies. These two were known as the needle and the string. Sunil was the needle and Surya Sankar the string. And, they were in a way inseparable. They would take all their money, take a bus to Colombo, and spend their days watching movie after movie until all their money was spent. And as a father, his children all agree he was the best in taking care of them, to prepare them for life, and to show them the correct pathway to success. His children remember his father as being strict but very fun-loving. He would sometimes use his hands to mimic a shadow puppet, invent a story out of his hands, and create like a creature running towards him. And, his house was full of fun for children, which came about one day because his second son, Lankasanta, over here, who's joined us tonight, decided to go out, and he disappeared from home. And when his father went looking for him, he found him playing games in a friend's house. He was unhappy about it, and so he decided to bring all the games to his house. And then from then on, children in the village would come to their house and play all the games, such as karam, checkers, cards, or flying kites. But these were the happiest days of his life with his family. And the other thing I should say about Sunil Santha is in this particular photo, it shows him actually planting banana trees. And after harvesting these trees, he would share the bananas with his neighbours. And this photo also shows his wife, Mrs. Leela Sunil Santha. And we need to pay a special tribute to her because, like a woman in a marriage where a woman is supporting her husband, she bore all the difficulties through the years when the children were small in raising them. This is a very typical way that women can show love to their husband in this particular way. So she really deserves a special tribute in the story. Another thing I find about Sunil Santha is he was a curious man. Lanka actually remembers his father being a marvellous motor mechanic. He knew how to fix cars. He would mend things, take cars to pieces, put them back together again. He once built a radio transmitter. And in those days, it was illegal to possess a radio transmitter in Sri Lanka, but Sunil built it for fun and to test his skill. And after testing the radio transmitter and not wishing to break the law, he dismantled it. And that kind of curiosity to understand how things worked may explain how he was able to find that natural pathway to create a new kind of Sinhala music with a strong sensibility that belonged to this land. What about his religious beliefs? We hear a lot about Sunil Santha being a Catholic, being born into a Catholic family, and some people like to draw a connection between his birth and his music. In fact, it was actually used against him because there were certain intellectuals in this country who, at the time, believed that Indian music was the only source, tended to dismiss Sunil's music as church music, simply because he was born a Catholic. And I think this is a completely fallacious and dishonest argument. You cannot attach a person's religion at birth to their artistic creations. I don't see how that can actually ever be justified. The thing about Sunil Santha is that while he was a Catholic, he was not a regular churchgoer. And at a certain point of his life, he came to distrust organised religions, and in fact, he has stopped attending Mass. He did not ask his children to go to church. In fact, his family describe him as spiritual rather than religious. Sunil once said his religion was, quote, to live a life without harming anybody. And in other words, he was liberal-minded. And I mean liberal-minded in the true sense of the word, not liberal-minded in the sense that politicians use the word. What about the relationship, coming back to this question about the relationship between the private man and his public persona? Though success came quickly, Sunil remained a private man. He was shy. He was almost 6 feet tall, handsome and very fair. He always wore the traditional Sri Lankan white dress, Jatika Aduma, and he stood out in a crowd. And whenever he was walking in the streets, people would recognize him, people would stare at him, and this made him uncomfortable. In fact, this was the reason why he decided to buy a car, because it gave him privacy. It enabled him to avoid invited stares from people, from strangers on the street. But on the other hand, while he was by nature shy and avoided public attention, his public persona asserted itself whenever he came to the stage. For example, when he appeared on Chitrasena shows, the audience could be unruly, hooting or booing, but the moment Sunil Santha stepped onto the stage, he would raise both hands up like this, and he would keep them raised until the entire audience fell silent, with every eye focused on him, waiting for him to sing. And that tells you something about the kind of authority and respect he could command on a stage. Not every artist can do that. So he was very confident about what he was doing, both as a composer and a performer. So, having in a short way, in a brief way, attempting to decipher something about the man and to give you that personal insight into who he actually was, in contrast to the public sort of image that has been portrayed, I want to turn now to the artistic aspects, and firstly I'm going to talk about his photographic artworks. In 1952, a major turning point came in Sunil Santha's life, which was triggered by his sudden removal from Radio Ceylon after he refused to audition for Professor Ratan Janaka on the grounds that he was imposing Hindustani music standards on indigenous music. So unable to record songs for Radio Ceylon, Sunil returned to his village. He married a Kandyan woman and he began to devote his time to raising a family. And he also found a new outlet for his creative energy in painting and photography, which are more solitary pursuits compared to music, which often involve lots of people. He painted Sri Lankan landscapes on paper, but none of these paintings appear to have survived, probably due to the fragility of the type of paper he used, which would have deteriorated very quickly in the humidity of Sri Lanka's tropical climate. His photographic works have survived, but they haven't been seen or exhibited, and this is where I'd like to start introducing a few of these. But before we go into the photographs, let me just make a few general comments. Sunil used a twin-lens Rolleiflex camera. This had a slow shutter speed, which meant in those days the people in the photographs would have to remain very still to avoid blurring. He sometimes developed the negatives in his room, which he used as a dark room on the nights he developed them. And he only took black and white photographs. And though some of the works we see were monochromatic, he also hand-coloured the photos by using dyes which were diluted in water. He preferred a simple visual format, and I'll come back to this word simple throughout this lecture. It's a motif that is running through this lecture, is this word simple. He used little manipulation. Now, visual simplicity can often grab our attention when you walk into a gallery and you see an artwork. If you understand that artwork immediately, it tends to bore us. What we want is something that's going to intrigue us. We see something in an artwork that excites us, or something is there, but we don't know what it is. And it engages our interest. And if an artwork engages our interest, over a long period of time, where we come back to it and see something new every time we come back to it, this is something that we can say is a very good artwork. So that kind of intriguing aspect that is very much a part of the art world we can see in Sunil Santha's art. Another aspect of his photography was the chiaroscuros. This is an Italian term meaning light, dark, which refers to the dynamic interplay of both direct light and shadows, so as to create a sense of depth and drama, or even to define the form of a work. So Sunil used a style of chiaroscuros reminiscent of the light-dark form found in the old Bogart movies or Orson Welles films, Casablanca, The Third Man, where you get these black and white films and they emphasize shadows, dark and light. This was called film noir, the style of film cinema that was very popular in the 1940s and 50s, and it influenced photographers at the time. And we're going to see that now in some of his works in just a moment. Another thing to say about his works, they tend to be classified into indoors and outdoor photographs. And the indoor photographs were often scripted. And what I mean by scripted is that they're not natural photographs in the sense of just simply taking a photograph, but thought out. Sunil would begin with a preconceived idea, so he composed and thought out the poses. He arranged or positioned the lamps or the items that were appearing in a photograph, and this interplay between lighting and shadows. So by using all the elements of photography, lighting, shadows, poses, positioning of items and scripting, he's aiming to express an idea, and by expressing an idea, we get a narrative. And that narrative we have to decipher by engaging with the work. We may not understand it immediately, and our initial understanding actually may be quite wrong. But that kind of engaging that draws us into art is quite different to what draws us into music. Is something that shows that he was very strong in his visual language as much as his music. This particular work was entered into a competition without his knowledge. In 1960, the studio that Sunil used to print his photographs secretly entered this into a competition organised by the Sunday Times. It was titled The Making of Greatness, and it won first prize. And it was published in the newspaper on the 29th of May 1960. It appears, of course, here as a black and white, but I think we're pretty certain that the original must have been hand-coloured. On the one hand, the photo gives us a glimpse into how Sunil's children used to study at home in Jaila. But let's look at the photo. We see a young boy sitting at a table with his head in his hands. He's looking at some reading material. It's night. He's alone in a small room or a private space. And there's this kerosene lamp here, which is a motif that reappears, which projects this kind of stark dynamic lighting, this chiaroscuros that I'm speaking of, onto the boy and onto the wall behind him. And there's something about the shadows that intrigue us as well. So the photo is lit for night. It's a simple composition, but it's scripted to reveal a narrative. And what is the narrative? And people can interpret this narrative in different ways, but one way of looking at this narrative, he has a look of innocence. But as innocent as he may be as a child, there's also wisdom, insofar as he chooses to respond to a desire to learn. And this serves to actually remind us that some people, and even adults, who think they know enough or are too lazy to learn more, this child actually teaches us to be humble in our desire for knowledge. He's consumed by the reading material in front of him. You can see it. He's absorbing its contents, giving serious attention to its substance and possibly what he can draw from it. He's making an effort to concentrate, to avoid distractions by covering his ears. But we also see it in his facial expressions. So this work is about the yearning for knowledge, the desire for knowledge. A child seeking to satisfy this desire for knowledge because he recognizes its importance in enriching and equipping him for life. It's not just a photograph of a boy sitting at a desk covering his ears with a lamp. We can decipher it, we can unpack it, we can read a lot into this photograph. And if I come back tomorrow, I could tell you a different story about this photograph. When I was in Sri Lanka 2 years ago, I interviewed one of Sunil Santha's friends in the 1950s, Anthony Pereira, and I discovered 4 photographs by Sunil Santha in his home, and I took them. And they were in damaged condition, but my artist friend in Malaysia, Ahmad Zaki Anwar, digitally restored these images, so they are now in a very good and pristine condition. So we're here, let's look at this photograph. And again, we see the kerosene lamp, but now we see 2 people in the photograph. And what's intriguing about it is the nature of their relationship. What are they actually doing? They're sitting at a desk. There's the lamp, and he's pointing here. And remember the slow shutter speed on the camera, so they would have to sit very still as this photograph is being taken. And there's reading material on the table, and he's pointing to it. So it appears almost that this elder boy is guiding the other boy, pointing to something that's significant. So the first photograph, while this was about the desire for knowledge, here we see mentoring, this idea of an elder boy guiding a child towards knowledge. And it's a beautiful photograph. This is also a beautiful photograph. Again, Sunil's deploying his lighting skills to complement the composition and to heighten a sense of intriguement. As with the previous 2 works, the source of light is this kerosene lamp. What is he doing? He seems to be focusing, he's contemplating. There are cards on the table, there are other items on the table, but we can't see all of the items. The chiaroscuros again with this light and dark, this very dark aspect that the shadows created because the light can't go through his body. It's very intriguing and well thought out composition. It's about contemplation. My feeling is it's about contemplating. But what is he contemplating on? We don't know. So now we've had desire for knowledge, we've had mentoring, and then this idea of contemplation coming in through these works. So we begin to see that when we start putting his works together, there is a broader narrative each work has its own narrative, but when you start placing the works together, they begin to say something much bigger. It's a puzzle. These photographs are a puzzle. And here, what's interesting, of course, again, it's a night photograph. It's something happening at night. He's alone. He has privacy. The room appears to be small and Spartan, because this is suggested by how close the table is to the window. The table here to the window. But also the boy sitting in the corner of the room. We get a sense that this is a very small room by just this aspect, sitting in the corner next to the window. And this pronounced chiaroscuros gives this work a very dramatic quality. There's a sense of drama here, even though it's a very still image. But something is happening. This next image is a beautiful photograph. There's a feeling of nostalgia in this image. It's a simple composition. We see a young man standing with his arms crossed in a partially lit room. You could go into a gallery and see this and you'd say that's a young man. And he's standing there and his arms are crossed. And if you thought that and went out, you would be missing what this photograph is really all about. Because when I look at this photograph, I'm intrigued. I want to know more about it. It's not just a young man standing there with his arms folded. What's really intriguing about this is his eyes. If you look at his eyes, he's staring. But who is he staring to? It's almost as if there's someone above him, a presence or a person. But if you look into the pupil of his eyes, there's a whiteness there. We're not seeing a reflection of a person, we're seeing a reflection of white. Almost like white is wisdom. So perhaps it's conceivable that what he's actually staring at is wisdom itself, which is something that actually exists within all of us. And, he's maintaining a confident stance because even if those arms are crossed, which is a possible sign of uneasiness, he still seems to trust the one or the presence to which he is gazing. So this is about gazing. There's a distant look. There's a feeling of timelessness, as if one is looking beyond time. But it's about wisdom. So now we've gone from knowledge to wisdom. And I want to say that these works have never been exhibited, but if you were to exhibit these 4 works as part of a much broader collection of Sunil Santha's photography, how would you position them in the gallery? Because positioning artworks in a gallery is quite important. If you put the works in the wrong sequencing, if you place a work against a work that is not right, you can really destroy the effect of an artwork in a gallery. So placing is very important. And my way of looking at this is we see a larger narrative. In the first photograph we saw mentoring, and I've rearranged them a little bit different. The yearning for knowledge, which won the first prize, I've put second here because this seems to come first, this mentoring idea. And then this yearning for knowledge, the boy on his own. We see contemplation and we see wisdom. And what's interesting is that knowledge without wisdom is knowledge. I mean, knowledge doesn't automatically lead to wisdom. Wisdom is something else. So knowledge is not enough. If you want to use knowledge, you need wisdom. So when we start to unpack all of these photographs in Sunil Santha's collections, we begin to see that we have to actually bring the photographs all together to be able to decipher what he's actually doing in all of these photographic works. It's not enough just to look at one work. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. We get all of these artworks and put them together, and we begin to see something quite extraordinary. Now, this next work is an outside work. And it seems to be a holiday snap. Now, I've been working with a Filipino artist, Ambi Ambano, in Manila. And we've had a lot of discussions about these photographs, and she taught me something about this photograph that I didn't see. Because when I looked at this photograph, I thought it was a holiday photograph. And what she was telling me really, really astonished me about this. If you look into this photograph, we see these boys. We see the young boy is attentive. He's listening. This man here seems to be talking and explaining. So there's these figures, these human figures sitting there. But we also see these man-made structures, the stupas. And what's interesting about these man-made structures is that they've existed in this country for centuries. We don't necessarily see them in houses, but these structures exist here and continue to exist because people recognize these as being something important. They actually contain something important. Otherwise, why would people repeat these structures? So these are man-made creations, the small stupa, the big stupa. Then we see the creation of nature and the trees. We see the land and the sky. So within this beautiful composition, we're seeing human to nature, human to human creations of an ancient world. And we begin to see that this photograph actually reveals a great deal about this country in a very, very astonishing way. This is not just a photograph of Anuradhapura. This is quite a strong artwork. And the thing about Sunil Santha's photographic works, but before I go on and talk about that, I want to just, for you to listen, to watch this, look at this photograph, and we're going to listen to a piece of music by Sunil Santha and just contemplate it.
Odadam silile navi hade suade Odadam silile navi hade suade Dile guan naga supun sarasand Hirentemi sudu saya pini Seli pahan silu pudai kelum sumi Pan kerai ada boya dine Puda dam siline Nevi hati suade Odadam silile Nevi hadi suade Samangiren enamidum se sudu Sinindu suadadum kerali gasi Matu buduwana nidu kanan dekmut Edinarani surepurata tusi Huda daham silile Levi hadi suade Huda daham silile Levi hadi suade Malin sudo suduride bumulusi Dia bindu buda sude matete veti Kiai binak adedam radanan Peturu hin silasi seti Puda dam silide Nevi hadi suade Puda dam silile Nevi hadi suade Bodu milun mandesarin nagane Sili sili yen sawan bire In nivisenei ate hadevete Heriya gulu ade nivandure Puda daham silile
Nevi Hade Suade Puladam Siline Nevi Hade Suade.
Sunil Santha's, the subjects in Sunil Santha's photography were often people that he knew. I don't have all of his photographs, and I certainly would like to explore these, but the ones that we do have show that they were people that he knew, and that it seems to me that many of these photographs will exist in people's homes somewhere, and gathering them all together might be a long task, because I found those works in Anthony Pereira's homes, and if he took photographs of other people, they could be in other people's homes. Earlier this year, when Lanka Santa came to know what I was doing with these photographs, he sent me some photographs. And these photographs come from Sunil Santha's collection. These are really beautiful photographs. The chiaroscuros is less obvious in these photographs. There's more directness. And I'll just take you to the first image. This is a beautiful portrait. It is a beautiful photograph. And again, it's somebody that Sunil Santha knows. The background, it looks like it's taken, when I saw this photograph, I thought it was taken in a photo studio. But Lanka Santha said no. Sunil Santha used the saris of his wife to create that backdrop, and it was taken in his house. And you look at the angle. What's interesting about the human figure, and say particularly the face, the greatest variety of textures and muscles is actually to be found in the human face, more than any other living creature. It's something that can intrigue us. And this particular photograph was again taken as a black and white, but he's hand-coloured it in the way, using the dyes that I mentioned earlier. But if we look closely, and it's hard to pick up on this image, there are a lot of bumps all the way across the image, all the way across. There's tiny little bumps across the photograph. Which is probably a textural effect Sunil intended, which he would have achieved by using a filter over the lens while taking the shot. We can see it's a beautiful photograph, but what do we mean by beauty? Of course, we can talk about physical beauty, but there's also an inherent beauty in feminine expressiveness, seen here in her pose, in expressions, her eyes, but more importantly, in her long, dark, thick hair. She has the freedom to show this. It's part of her expressiveness. It's part of her femininity. And I say that because in some cultures, of course, you have to cover your hair. You cannot express your hair, or you have to cut it. And that erodes dignity. But here we see a woman who's able to be expressive, to express everything about her, including her hair. And there's dignity in that. And I feel that's what that particular image captures. It's a beautiful photograph. I'll just run through these quickly. Again, these are people that Sunil Santha knew. Very good portraits. This photograph here is actually Sunil Santha. My friend Ahmed Zaki couldn't repair this one because it's so damaged down here. We need the original negative. But the others have been repaired. It's just too badly damaged. But this is Sunil Santha. And finally, I want to show you a photograph that Lanka sent me recently. This is Lanka, Mr. Lanka down here. And on this particular day, he had fallen over and cut his chin, and he was crying. And Sunil Santha took this photograph to make him feel better, to stop the crying and to make him feel happy. Well, what's interesting about the photograph is juxtapositioning this Christ figure, the suffering of Christ and the suffering of Lanka in this particular photograph. That suffering is something that is, something is something that we should all share in relation to Christ in this particular image. So that can actually be seen in it, but primarily this photograph is taken to make a young boy feel better. It's an intriguing photograph too. So I want to continue the journey with these photographs and explore them more, because these are some very interesting materials, some very interesting artworks that reveal a great deal. But for the time being, I'm going to move away from his photography now into things that will be more familiar to you, which is Sunil Santha, the composer. In this part of the lecture, I don't propose to really survey his music or to go into really generalized statements about Sunil Santha's music. What I want to do here is to illustrate or investigate the kind of craftsmanship he built into his music, because people often say his music was simple, there's not much to it, and I want to show you there's something different about his music. In fact, this notion of simplicity, and I'll make a statement here which I'll come back to. What people don't understand, and I hear people always talking about music, Sunil Santha's music being simple, but what do they mean by being simple? It means Sunil Santha chose to be simple in delivering his music, but the substance and the content of his music is anything but simple. There's a richness to the text. A composer or a performer might choose a more complex type of delivery, perhaps using Indian raga, but that doesn't mean the substance and the content of the substance is better. It's just different. And I think this is where people get into a misunderstanding about Sunil Santha. There's nothing wrong in being simple. We've seen in his artworks, they're visually simple, but that doesn't mean the substance and the content is simple. It's rich. We can engage with it. It can intrigue us. And when we look into his music, we look into his artworks, he chose a simple way to express. But that content is so rich, so meaningful. It engages us over decades, and it's continuing to engage us today. And I think this is the really important thing to say about Sunil Santha. Simplicity doesn't mean that it's less effective. In fact, it's the other way around. There's no such thing as superiority in music or visual arts. Yeah, curators, art historians like to say painting is better than charcoals, but it doesn't mean it is better than charcoals. It just means they like it better and they're going to favour it better and write it up better. But all art forms and all music forms are equal. You just got to find out where they belong and how to understand them in their own terms. But comparing one form of music with another is just absolutely ridiculous to try and even attempt. Now, Sunil Santha began composing songs in the mid-1940s. And although he lived for another 36 years, he was active in music for just 8 years. Only 8 years of his life he's devoted to music, from 1946 to 52, 1967 to 68, and a few months composing songs for films. And over that short period, he composed about 300 songs. That's an average of about 40 songs per year. And if he had not been banished from Radio Ceylon for 15 years, he could have conceivably composed another 600 songs. He could have composed as many as 1,000 songs. But we have only 300 songs. And those 300 songs remain as a permanent legacy in the sense that they continue to be passed down from generation to generation to generation. The thing about Sunil Santha is he liked to compose in the morning. And there's something very Sunilese about that, historically, I mean. He didn't compose quickly. He approached composition with purpose, with craftsmanship, in the sense that composing for him was a continual process of exploring, experimenting, revising, trying different things out. And if you listen to different versions of his recordings, say, take one song and listen to different recordings, you can hear that he's experimenting, he's trying this out, he's trying that out. So it's a continual process, just like an artist works, the same way that an artist works. And that indicates that it's not actually about simplicity. The thing about inspiration is it can strike an artist, a composer or an artist at any moment. And for Sunil Santha, this could occur while he was fixing a car, travelling in a bus, hearing a temple bell, hearing the sounds of water dripping, the call of a bird. All of these things could trigger musical ideas, just as they do in an artist. And whenever an idea would come, he would write it down. But the actual composition part, he would do usually in the morning. And this was a process of constantly revising. Now, I want to talk about one song today. And the song I've chosen to talk about is, for me, it's a personal choice. It's one of the most beautiful songs I've heard, irrespective of Sri Lanka, Sarada Walagaba, which means bosom of the clouds. It's a song, the song is a compliment to the beauty of the landscape, to nature glowing under the radiance of a brilliant full moon, where all living things from plants, nature and human are awestruck by the beauty of the world, of our world in the moonlight. You see, the thing is, our existence is not only about human beings. It's about many things. It's about stones, it's about rocks, it's about rivers, it's about nature, it's about oceans. All these things have a purpose on our planet, in our world. And even what we saw in the Anuradhapura photograph, we can see in some of his words in the music, is seeing this relationship between humanity, between humans, nature, coexisting in a planet, in particularly in the Sinhala world. Now, Sarada Walagaba, Sunil recorded several versions of this song, and there is a version for tabla and piano which is available on YouTube, but the one that really intrigued me the most is a version with orchestra. And before I go further, I'll play a bit of this song so you're aware of it. The singer actually, the female singer on the song is Nalini Ranasinger, and this was the first song she recorded with Sunil Santha. And the male singer is Sunil Santha. And I'll play it in a moment. But one thing I'd like to say is that at a fundamental structural level, and I don't want to go on about this because I talked about this in my lecture 2 years ago, Sunil set the texts to what is known as Lagu Guru. This is the Sinhala system of short and long syllables, in which short syllables are given shorter durations, so for example, quavers, and long syllables are given longer durations, for example, crotchets or minims, to use Western equivalents. But another dimension about his music, and we can see that in this song, is that at a certain point in his music evolution, he began restricting the melodies of his songs to 3, 4, or 5 pitches. And the voice really goes beyond an octave, except, of course, if you're comparing a female singer with a male singer. They're singing the same melody, but they may be at different octaves, but that may not be really significant. So Sarada Walagaba has 5 pitches, C, D, E, F, G, and the melody doesn't go beyond the range of a fifth. So let's have a listen to this song, just to give you a taste of what it is before I go into trying talking about it. And this is the orchestral version.
නිබඳ සිනා කිරි උතුරයි මිහි මත ලොවම ඉරස් වෙදන වීමත් වෙත මත් වෙත විස්ම වෙලා තුරුලිය අර බල මැන
Wala gabe payai punsand Niband sina kiri uturai mihimat Luw mengires vedenevi matvit විස්ම වෙලා තුරුලිය අර බලමැන
So you might say, well, that's a simple little song. It's got a pretty little melody. can't be that complicated, but it is. It is quite a complicated song in the sense that a lot of decisions have been made into how things are actually put together here. And I'll just get out of this. And I've gone where I have no idea where I've gone here. Okay. Okay. So I made a transcription of this orchestral version. It's really hard to transcribe this song. You think the melody is only 4 notes, but what is he doing? You hear a lot of accentuation on certain syllables. Certain syllables are accentuated. There is a lot of colours injected into particular pitches, and I'll come back and illustrate this in a moment. There's certain kind of ornamentation, and if you slow down the ornamentation, you can hear very complicated rhythms. It's very complicated, almost classical rather than popular, but you don't notice it when it's sped up. It makes it very hard to transcribe it. How do you transcribe where people are fluctuating in between pitches in a certain kind of way is quite difficult. You can give symbols. In looking at this piece, what I'll do is actually divide it into 2 parts. I'll look at the vocal part first, and then I'll talk about the orchestral part. Yeah, 5 pitches, but did you hear the way that certain things are accentuated on certain syllables? Sarada wala gaba, sarada wala gaba pai pun, pun sanda pun, and there's an ornamentation on this particular word, which is very complicated, and you can hear certain accentuations. But did you notice when Sunil came to sing the song, the time signature had changed and the tempo had dropped significantly, and he was singing it in 6/8. Sarada wala. He's singing it like that, whereas Nalini is singing it Sarada wala. And if you listen to the last verse, Sunil Santha combines the 2 together. Nalini is singing it in 4/4. Sunil is singing it in 6/8. How does that happen? What's going on? So, it's not just simply singing a melody. We're hearing there are transitions going on, and I'll talk about those transitions and the devices that are used. There are lots of things here in terms of slurring up notes, and I'll illustrate it when I come back to the song, and ornamentation and accentuations, so that when Sunil was rehearsing the songs, although it may not be in the notation, he would be emphasizing this with the singers. He would be telling singers, sing more forcefully here, emphasize this word here, and ornament this word here in this kind of way. And all of these things inject color and inject feeling into these simple melodies. So they're simple melodies, but if you listen very, very closely, these melodies and the way that these things are being performed is very, very complex. It's not simple, in fact. I think it's interesting to note that all these aspects that I'm talking about, using Laga Guru, the long and short syllables, using 3 to 5 pitches, limiting the pitch range in a melody to a 5th or less, not extending the vocal line beyond an octave, accentuating these syllables, particularly at the end of phrases, and using ornamentation. These aspects that we find in Sunil Santha's songs, and I know this because I researched in the Dalada Maligawa, the Karikara Madura, for my PhD thesis. All these things we find in temple singing in the Maligawa. Temple singing, Karikara Madura, do not sing beyond an octave. The range of many of their melodies go no beyond a 5th. They use Laga Guru. They accentuate on certain syllables, but the ornamentation maybe is different. But there's many aspects in common, even though the 2 traditions sound quite different. When you analyze it, you begin to see actually that there's something in these 2 traditions that has a strong, similar sensibility in music. Who said there was never a similar music? Who said it? Who said similar music didn't exist? I read this sometimes in the newspapers, and I wonder what people actually mean by this. because there's a sensibility in these things. And we see it in the Maligawa, and if it exists in the Maligawa, and that's a tradition that's been going on since the 1770s, it can't be just a coincidence that we find similar things in Sunil Santha's music. I just want to talk a little bit now about the orchestral aspect of his music. And to do this, what I want to do is play that extract again and illustrate it while we're actually listening to it. Hearing these violins playing very in the high register, pizzicato strings. Boom, 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 boom. It's an introduction. Hear the accentuation and the ornamentation. Pitch is going up. It's gone up a semitone from going up to an F now. So in the voice you can hear the line is the contour of the shape of the melodic line is increasing. It starts on a C going up to an E and then coming back to a C, just 3 notes, and then the next line it's going up and it's keep going up, and that creates a kind of tension. And on the last line, it's coming and it descends and it falls and it resolves it in a very beautiful way. We have that melodic shape. But in the instruments we hear the violin, we can hear a Hawaiian guitar playing in unison, in octaves, and the rhythm of the Hawaiian guitar is slightly different to the strings. It's adding a colour. So what Sunil's actually doing is painting colours of instruments, the sounds of colours. The strings are very bright. There's a tabla in there, and there's the flutes. And what are the flutes doing? Did you hear the flutes? When you listen to the flutes, have a listen. They only occur at a certain time in the song. Flutes are there. So we hear this flutes coming in every time the voice is echoing that last phrase. This wonderful flute thing just comes in for there as a kind of complement to the vocal line. It's again not about harmony, it's about colours. People say his music is harmonic, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The other thing I want to say about this, because there's many things to say about this song, is those transitions, these beautiful transitions. And there's one coming up here. How does Sunil Santha, it's always a challenge for a composer to change time signatures and to change speed. It's a challenge to go from one thing to another, and how you solve that. But Sunil Santha did it in a very simple way, in a very ingenious way. He just uses an upward motif in a phrase, which is something like this. Oops. Yeah, he uses these upward phrases here. So at the end of the first verse, where you get the, I'll go on this thing here. The end of the first verse, I've got it upside down. So the end of the first verse, when he's singing the last line, Balamina, we'll hear that in a moment. You listen for the strings and this little upward phrase. That is all you need to change into another time signature and to descend like a jet airliner, reducing considerably into 6/8 down here. The same melody, but it's treated in a different way, and suddenly we get a solo violin coming up with this beautiful upward phrase. So let's listen to that, because it's just such a beautiful thing and a very ingenious device. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. Same melody, but not in 4/4. That's a beautiful solo violin there. We're in 3/4. sorry, 6/8. The tempo has gone from 95 down to 65 metronomically. That's a big drop. Again, adding this very contrasting colour between the female and the male voice. Listen to the accentuations on certain syllables. And then we get another transition coming up because it's got to go back into 4/4. So how does someone do that? A triplet. A simple triplet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And we're back into 4/4. Just a very simple connection, and the tempo has gone back up to 95. That's brilliant. How do you work all that out? So when you actually look at the song, there's so many decisions that are made into how that song is put together. From the vocals, how you accentuate certain words, how you ornamentate certain words, how the instruments are all coming in together at certain times, the transitions, moving it, the structure of the song. It's actually quite complex. Not easy, not an easy song. It's not easy to transcribe it. And it's actually not easy to perform it, but when we listen to it, it sounds simple. There's a difference between listening to something and seeing something and saying it's simple, but when you get into the mechanics of trying to work out what the hell is going on, you find it's not simple at all. And I just want to come now to one last point, which is really about Sunil Santha's music language, because I hear a lot of the times people saying that his music is harmonic. And in some respects, this is true, but I don't think it's the main thing, and it's not really harmonic. Because when we talk about Lagu Guru, we're talking about meters, we're talking about syllables having long and short sounds. So in fact, the driving force of his music is metrically driven at the structural level. We mustn't forget that. It's fundamentally driven by meter. And in that particular song, we haven't heard it, but I might play it again in a moment. You hear the counter rhythm between 6/8 and 4/4. When you listen to the orchestral, there's not really harmonic treatment in a vertical sense. It's not about thirds and sixths. It's about colours. It's about painting colours of sounds. And if you listen, the only harmonic instrument in this song is the guitar. And when you analyse it, as I've done here, just to look at this opening, we don't actually get full chords. We don't get full F chords or full C chords. We're just getting part of the chord all the way through the song. If you actually put full, rich chords in the song, it interferes in the melody. It changes the colour of the melody. So the melody is beautiful if you restrict harmony, not if you impose it and push it. You add a lot of harmony, you start to hear the vocal line, the feeling of it, the colour of it is changing. So his music is only harmonic up to a point. What that means for performers today, I can't answer that question because nothing is frozen in time when it comes to music. What I'm suggesting is that it's good to be aware of his music language and what it was really about, what he was actually doing, his expressive qualities. And it's not just simply a case of banging out chords, 3, 4, 5 chords, but looking at how he actually applied what notes he was actually using. And I'll play a little bit in a moment, and you listen to the guitar part, it's not playing full chords. So just in conclusion here, looking at his visual art and his music, what we see is this idea of simplicity. He goes for a simple visual format. He's not going to do anything complicated or make tricks. We see it in his music. It's a simple format. But again, I come back to this point. It's simplicity, it's simple only in its delivery for a listener. So we can understand it, we can listen to it, we can respond to it, to that simplicity. But when you get into analysing the nuts and bolts of how his music works, it's actually quite complex. In the substance, in the content, not only musically, but in the texts, it's not simple at all. It can engage us. And so I can accept simplicity to a certain extent, but because of what I've just explained here, I reject this notion of just dismissing his music as simple. And there's nothing wrong actually in being simple in music anyway. It's simplicity in delivery, just as an artist can be simplicity in delivery of an artwork. And what sets Sunil Santha apart from other composers just is the fact, I mean, if you take a composer who does have complex delivery, just keep in mind that that is separate to substance of content, because it may not necessarily be in the content in the way that Sunil Santha's songs might be. The thing about his music too is there's no distractions. If you listen to this music, there's nothing to distract us. He's not putting anything that's unnecessary. He's not, he only puts in the things that are absolutely essential to communicate. And this emphasis on trying to capture a Sri Lankan sensibility in contrast to Indian classical music. So while composers in Sri Lanka are free to draw on Indian classical raga music, they're free to do it. If a composer wants to do it, it's a free country, they can do it, there's nothing wrong in it. Or any world tradition, I think we should also bear in mind that raga music cannot always satisfy the emotions and the sensibilities of people living in this particular land. However much some people might think so, it doesn't. And I think that's really what underpins Sunil Santha's aspiration to forge a new kind of music. One other thing I'd like to say here is that his music shows a strong attraction to human life and to the natural world found in trees, rivers and streams and mountains, or in those architectural achievements of the ancient peoples of this land. And he was interested in the value system of the early peoples of this land too, which was not about materialism or consumerism, as is so often the case today, but values to do with living a purposeful and meaningful life that comes out of this desire for knowledge, contemplation and wisdom. Now, one thing I just want to finish here, and we'll be done, is just to listen to the last verse of the song, so you can hear how he combines 6/8 with 4/4.
Nibbanda sina kiri uturai mini
6/8, which she sings.
Lovem eras vedane mat vita.
It's almost counter-rhythmic. And when you sing the song in 6/8, you accentuate different words to when you sing it in 4/4. And yet they finish together at the same time. That's what's remarkable. That really concludes my lecture, and I'm welcoming any questions that you may have. Thank you very much. And
to take questions, it's customary that we present our lecturer with a token of appreciation. May I kindly invite you all here, sir, to give to you one of our prestigious volumes, which is certificate for the fascinating lecture. Thank you. Question time, ladies and gentlemen.
Can you please tell us why Sunil Santha was sacked from Radio Ceylon? After all this wonderful work that he had done, any special reason why he was sent away from Radio Ceylon?
I think it's kind of understood. I think that question has been asked 1,000 times and probably more. So, I mean, we know that, you know, around about 1952, around about that time, a letter or a document a proposal was formulated by the music section at Radio Ceylon to create an auditioning system. There's a document that actually sets out that there's going to be an A, B grades auditioning system. And Sunil Santha opposed this, and he went around Radio Ceylon telling people this is not a good idea, but nobody would listen to him. And so, and he certainly wasn't going to be a part of it. And so when Professor Ratan Janaka came down and this system began, that document, by the way, the proposal stated very clearly that any artist who wasn't prepared to audition would be sacked. It stated very clearly in the proposal that was being drafted at Radio Ceylon. a document which is very difficult to locate these days, but it's there. Sunil Santha has reminded us of it being there. So he knew he was going to be sacked if he didn't audition. But he wanted to make a stand because he felt that the professor was going to impose Hindustani music standards. And you also have to remember that he did use Western instruments, and some people at Radio Ceylon didn't like the use of the piano, they didn't like the use of certain Western instruments, or Western orchestration techniques. Now, when you listen to that music, it's not Western orchestration in a pure sense of Western orchestration. It's not. It's not how Western musicians orchestrate. And for some reason, Radio Ceylon at the time couldn't understand that, the powers that be that couldn't understand it. So he wasn't going to continue to work in a system that was going to deny him that freedom. This is about freedom, actually. You shouldn't create a policy that stops people being free to express their particular creative journey by imposing a certain kind of system because you believe that system is going to create a higher standard. That's absurd. I believe in the freedom of artists to be free. If they want to follow the Indian tradition, I believe that that's right. I don't believe in creating policies that restrict freedom. And this really policy was about restricting freedom. It was a bad policy.
Sunil Santha was a guitarist, not a vocalist. In Sri Lanka only he was a vocalist. In India also sitar player. He got his certificate on the sitar, first class, first in the list. I have seen his certificate. His wife showed me the certificate. Yes. Then have you seen any, have you come across any place where he played the sitar?
When you listen to the, I didn't quite hear exactly what you were saying, but
He says he was a sitar player.
yes, he was. Yes.
Do you have seen him playing sitar?
I personally haven't seen him playing the sitar, but what I do know is that when he did start to use the sitar, you see, the sitar is a bending instrument. It's a bending, in the Indian tradition, it's a bending instrument. But if you listen to the way the sitar is used on Sunil Santha's songs, it's not bending. He's using the sitar in a different way. He's stripping those colours out.
Even at the Radio Ceylon it is not available. His sitar playing is not available.
Radio Ceylon, his sitar playing is not available, he says.
Oh, that's tragic. Someone should make it available. I'm not a member of the SLBC, so I can't speak about that, but someone there must know.
Now, this gentleman just told us that he was a very good sitarist, and his grounding also was in India. So, any reason why he chose the violin and the Hawaiian guitar, opted to choose those two instruments instead of a sitar, a sarod, a tabla, a flute, working within the limited five melody patterns which we have. Any idea why he opted to use the Hawaiian guitar and the violin?
If you go back to the 30s and 40s, the common practice was to appropriate Indian music for creating Sinhala songs. It was so strong in this country that at that particular time, Sunil Santha decided that if you're going to create a music with a local sensibility, his pathway for doing that was to avoid Indian colours. So initially he didn't use the sitar, and he didn't use particular Indian instruments. In the later part of his music, you do hear these instruments, but as I said earlier, he doesn't use them in an Indian way. He doesn't use the tabla in an Indian way. He wanted to strip those colours out. But that's his right as a creative person, because he believed that this was the pathway to forging a music for a Sri Lankan audience.
Yeah, but if he wanted to create the Sri Lankan identity with his music, I mean, the sitar, the sarod, the tabla, those are closer to us, no, culturally. So the moment you use a Hawaiian guitar and the violin, sort of you drift into it, the words tend to resonate in most of our music, you know. I mean, not just limited to Sunil Santha,
I
but
think,
with
yeah.
his sensibility, I'm a bit surprised why sort of he didn't opt to stick to the classical Indian instruments.
I think you missed the point that I made, that at the time in the 30s, you've got to think of the political context, and the context at the time was that Indian music was so dominant in this field, but not in an inventive way. It was just simply copying. You copied the latest Hindi tunes and you put them to similar words. And so Sunil Santha wanted to move away from that. And that was the pathway that he chose. The use of the Hawaiian guitar, he had Patrick Denapiti, his good friend. Just that he used an Hawaiian guitar, he used particular instruments, he avoided certain instruments, but he was painting colours. He was trying to paint a new set of colours. The Indian instruments are not necessarily close to everybody here, and I'm not quite sure what is meant by the 5 pitches and how they relate to the use of Indian instruments. But I think it comes back to his decision at the time and the context of the time. You have to go back and understand the context of the 1930s and 40s, where there wasn't really a strong sense of a music culture here being belonging here, and this idea of having to copy creates a certain cultural cringe that you have to lean on another culture in order to create it. He wanted to move away from that. As any creative artist, he has the right to do that. He chose to do that. And people responded to that. There was a sensibility in what he did that people responded to, and people loved it, and they still love it. So the best answer to that is in the people of this country who respond to his music. Why do they respond to it if it's not using Indian? Why do people are coming along and saying, well, let's not listen to this music? There are some people that do, but they are a group of people who think that Indian music is the only music that should be driving here. He thought differently, and people responded to that, and I think in the end he's proven to have made the right decision in forging a music that had a sensibility that belonged here. I'm not convinced by the argument that everything Indian has a sensibility that relates here. Some things maybe, but not everything. There are certain things that it doesn't express. I've walked through streams in Kandy, around Kandy, and heard sounds that are not related to India. I've visited Sigiri and spent a lot of time in Sigiri and felt something about that environment that is not specifically Indian.
I mean, using Indian instruments doesn't mean that we are trying to be Indian by any means.
No, but you see, when you play a sitar, as I said, a sitar is a bending instrument, and he wanted to move away from that. It has when you use it as a bending instrument, it has an Indian colour. When you see the way the tabla is played in Indian, it's full of Indian colours. If you look at the way Sunil Santha used a tabla, he stripped away those colours. So what's wrong with that?
No, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, this is a period when people are trying to evolve a Sri Lankan identity,
Yes.
in all forms of art, in all disciplines, all aesthetic disciplines. So I was just curious why him being such an excellent sitar player never attempted to drift into use the instrument. I'm not talking of Indian music. I mean, you can use the tabla, the sitar, the sarod, everything, but create it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go on to an Indian sound wave. We have gamigis, we have the vannamas, we have a whole range of music identified even with us. So, I mean, it's a bit curious, I mean, I love his music.
Yeah.
There's no question about it.
I think we should make a distinction between a performer and a composer. Yeah, he was a sitar performer, but at a certain point he decided to move away from that to being a creative person as a composer. And in making that decision, obviously he was going to drop being a sitar performer. And he was going to pursue his path. That's natural when a person comes out of a university. You don't have to follow what you've actually studied. So again, it comes back to the broader question of what Sunil Santha was believing and thinking at the time in the context of post-colonial period in this country, that he decided that it wasn't. See, if you take Lionel Edersinger, He had a lot of compositions in using Indian raga, but how many people remember them today? If they have a similar sensibility, if raga music has a similar sensibility, why don't we hear, how many people can riddle out his compositions today? Alanka.
I want to clear one thing. Earlier I heard that Sunil Santha, somebody said that Sunil Santha has no vocal education in India. I can show that Professor Ratan Jankar's letter. He was actually awarded first class degree in diploma in vocal in Bhatkande, and Professor Ratan Jankar writes that he is the only Ceylonese to obtain both degrees from the instrumental and the vocal. So I have the letter. Anybody wants, let me know. And his question, please. I'm trying to let you hear Sunil Santha's voice. He's talking about what he tried to do at that time. You can hear what he's explaining actually what he has done. He said that he wants to move away from Vanga and Hindustani style and create our own music. So that's what he has done with his educational background. So he created something suitable for our country and people liked it. So I think that's the bottom line. So it's a supply and demand. So people liked it, and then a group of people doesn't want Sunil Santha to become so popular and his music to establish in Sri Lanka. So they found a way to get rid of him. And then to understand that is what happened in 1952, it is very easy to understand when you look back and see in 1967 or 66, SLBC came to him, came to our home and asked him to come and do the auditioning Professor Ratan Jankar did in 1952. So he stayed at home for 15 years and then he did that job. So that means anybody can understand in 1952 also he was the qualified person to do the auditioning in Sri Lanka, because at that time he is the only one had that kind of music education. So I think it is clear.
Regarding the photographs, actually I don't know how many, I have never heard of Sunil Santha's photographs. And I was, just two questions. One, the last photograph, the wisdom one. The white of the eyes, has it touched the photograph, or how did he get the, that whiteness in the eye? And the expressions on the face when it's very slow shutter speed, getting those particular expressions at the time the photograph actually is taken.
It's about directing light. It's the photographer has control over direction of light. So he's directing light in a particular way. Those, as I say, those photographs are scripted. He's controlling everything. It's like a composition. It is a composition, in fact. So the light, the use of light, the use of this chiaroscuros and dark and density, and the way the figures are positioned, what they're doing, what they're holding, what they're looking at. All these things have been preconceived. They've been created in his mind and scripted, like a play. The photographs have been scripted. And even right down to the technical things of light, where the light is being cast. A really good photographer knows how to do that. And Sunil Santha, it shows his ability, actually, that he was really good at photography. He understood the language of visual art to produce those kind of photographs. It shows that he was a really outstanding photographer.
I believe that concludes the question time. Am I right? One more, okay.
Sorry, you didn't answer the question about the evidence of what
the Kalikarma music?
Yeah, because I've analysed the tradition. I know the tradition very well, and I've analysed Sunil Santha. And if you look at my lecture, if you really look at the lecture which Sunil Lanka Santha has published, I show that in relation to a verse. There's a verse in there, Jaya Mangala Dalada Samanduta, Sakalabuatala Patalakalayasa, Sakalabuatala Patalakalayasa. This is a verse sung in the Maligawa. Sakala, all short syllables. Sakalabuatala Patalakalayasa. Tedeti Samanduta. Mang is a long syllable, Galam. If you look at Sunil Santha's songs, it's the same. So within those particular long syllables, you get a tala in the Maligawa. There's a tala, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Short, long syllables all the way through that. And I'd just like to ask, because I know that's being filmed, but again I have to say, please do not broadcast that. You have to edit that out in respect of the Maligawa, because this is something that I have to talk about with the Kadikana Madura, because that particular astika is only sung when the tooth relic is being returned to the inner sanctum at the end of the Maligawa. It's a very auspicious thing. So that cannot be published, and it must be not ever put on YouTube or anything, because it would again breach the contract. But what I did that just for scholarly reasons to show. Now, that's all full of short and long syllables. You can hear that certain things are being accentuated. And you can see the same things in Sunil Santha's songs. He uses the same principles. It sounds different because his music is entertainment, Maligawa music is ritual. But at a structural and fundamental level, there are many aspects in common, and that particular song doesn't go beyond an octave, like Sarada Walagaba or Malguma Guma or any of the other songs. It actually has, that particular one, because it's an auspicious one, it does have more than 5 pitches. But most of the Maligawa, most of the temple, Kadikana Madura is around 5 pitches or less. It's using the same principles. So I've analysed the two traditions, and I've shown this in my lecture that I gave 2 years ago here. That's the evidence.
Well, thank you, Dr. Donaldson. That was a beautiful and very emotive presentation. Thank you, sir. I don't think we have had anything like this ever before being presented to our audience. Thank you very much.
Wow.